Hello and welcome to Season 3 of the Push podcast. My name's Jack Ferguson, an experienced brand strategist with a science background. In my career, I've worked across 25 industries and helped increase client and employer revenue by over $40 million. I will be your host. This season of the podcast is essential listening for marketers looking to better sell their strategies to stakeholders, get client buy-in, and keep internal teams engaged. Thanks for being here, and don't forget to subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on. Hello and welcome to episode 71, season 3 of the Push podcast. I thank you for tuning in today. This episode's a solo episode, so I'm going to be speaking about, or rather answering questions about brand strategy from Reddit. Well, most of the questions that I found for this episode were from Reddit. Please let me know if you enjoy this format and I'll be sure to do it more often if so. So let's start with the first question. So this is from Reddit user Captain the Red Duck. We're an established B2B SaaS company in Europe trying to expand into the US. We tested our current positioning, USP and messaging, and the feedback was basically nobody cares. Now our brand strategy rework meeting has grown from 3 people to half the company, including the head of CMS, and every meeting turns into hypothetical vision chat. Who should actually be in the room? Now, there was another related question that I'll throw in here as well. Someone said, we're reworking the brand, but every stakeholder keeps dragging the conversation into vision, possible client needs, and hypothetical futures. How do we keep brand strategy meetings from turning into philosophy club? So a common issue, a company is trying to go into a new market and they find that what they're doing in the current market is not effective in the new market. And the first thing I'd say is that there's not necessarily people who should be in the room within the company. Obviously, the marketing team, if you've got customer success, it's good to talk to them as well. But instead, I'd think about it like anybody that should or wants a contribution, you can provide a forum where they can put their 2 cents forward. So maybe that's a half an hour meeting, an hour meeting, maybe that's a recorded Zoom call. If you actually provide a space where people know they're going to be able to give their feedback, give their 2 cents, that can be quite effective. It also caps it a little bit for you. So if you say, look, here's the forum, let's talk about this in a week, bring along all your ideas, all your thoughts, let's get them all out here, I'll record them. It does contain it a little bit in the sense that they bring everything to that meeting, they get it out, and there is an underlying assumption or an underlying premise there that's their chance to have their say. So that's one thing I would say straight off the back. The other issue I see is that you're probably looking inwards instead of talking to the market. So more internal meetings is not really going to solve this. You need to actually find out whether this is a market that you should enter, A, because perhaps you shouldn't, and perhaps like the market research that needed to get done wasn't done prior to committing to enter the US. So a few options would be that you actually do more research with the market first and you're gauging what is actually more likely to be effective around your positioning, USP and messaging. You could also suggest hiring a market researcher. So someone like Ryan Gibson, who was on the latest episode of the podcast, could actually be someone who steps in and does the research. The other idea would be perhaps to look at a different market and maybe what you currently have is useful there. If it is just a question of messaging and you can keep your product the same, but your messaging needs to change, then that's not as big of a change that you'd need to make if you were to be successful in the US. However, if they just don't need your product there, it might be worth evaluating whether that market entry at this point in time is a good one or not. And perhaps it'd be a good idea to look at some other markets where your testing and your research comes back indicating that you would be more effective there. All right, next question. We're a software company of about 300 people expanding into Germany. I think I know how to position our products, but honestly, how do I know when positioning is actually working? So that question came from Reddit user Troy Cameron Stein. For this one, I'd just say, ask your customers who they compared you to when they bought from you. Why'd they go with you? If the way you're thinking about the positioning of your product is reflective of how your customers are perceiving your position relative to your competitors, I'd say that your positioning is effective. The other thing I'd also mention here is that you can acquire customers. You can even be successful in spite of your brand strategy, not because of it. Just because something's working, it doesn't necessarily mean that it was because of superior positioning, for example. But best way to go about it is to talk to your customers. Okay, next question. This one's from Reddit user Drummer414. We're a luxury electronics brand with 20 plus years in Europe and only 4 to 5 years in the US. We're just starting to get traction, but the company wants to change the name by dropping the vowels while keeping the same first letter and logo. Is changing a not great name worse than keeping it? So the first thing to note about name changes is obviously you are wiping all your equity basically that you have in the current name. Now, you mentioned that you might keep your logo. So there is an indication there that you're going to keep the scaffolding of your brand assets while changing the name. And if you are going to change your name, you don't really want to change everything at once if you are somewhat established. 4 to 5 years in a market, your name probably has started to get some equity. So what I'd do here is I'd try and quantify that a bit better. So here you can look at things like branded search, how that's increased over time. If you are to change the name and you're changing it so much that the existing equity won't be present, that is evidence to perhaps not change it. I'd also ask how you're judging it's not a great name. And I'd be intrigued at how getting rid of the vowels would actually improve a name. That's going to make a name in general pretty hard to pronounce. So your name will be actually harder to spread, most likely. I'd have to actually look at the name itself to pass judgment on that, but that would be my assumption given the level of detail I have at the moment. So I'd say if you see branded search increasing over the 4 to 5 years you've been in the US, it's well worth considering whether this is a really good idea or not. If you do change it, you do just have to know that you are resetting that equity somewhat. And the only real good reason to do that would be if your current name is doing damage or if you are looking to make it more scalable, more easily shareable, and you know that there's going to be an initial hit to equity, but you're happy to take that hit and then it will scale faster or easier in the future. All right, next question is from Reddit user Teddy Brukowskis. They've said our product category is saturated and everyone has similar features. The real differences only matter to enterprise buyers: security, governance, compliance, integration, scalability, procurement, readiness. How do we position the product when smaller customers don't care about the thing that makes us different? So firstly, I'd be asking here, do you actually have smaller customers? Do you have many smaller customers? Why did they come to you in the first place? It's interesting to think about an enterprise product also being great for a small business. When you say smaller customers, I'm not sure how much smaller you mean. That you'd start by asking them why they actually came to you and not someone else would be a good place to start. I'd also ask why not just keep selling to enterprise buyers if that's a market segment that's really been effective. Unless you have a reason to go into a smaller market, why are you going to go into it? Having the same brand but having different messaging and different ways of approaching different markets obviously complicates things. If you want to get small customers and they don't care about the things that make you different and you need to be different, then you need to build something that they care about that makes you different. If there's a reason you're happy to be a commodity to them and you're going for a distinctiveness play rather than differentiation play, there you're trying to be known and come to mind rather than worrying about being differentiated at all. But I'd say compare the economics of the different types of customers and the cost of acquiring both sets in the first place. Consider whether you want to spend more money for less return on smaller customers if the large, more profitable customers are selling easier. And there's also a cost of distraction if you're chasing two entirely different sets of customer. So make sure it's worth it. Sometimes, and this will probably be a recurring theme throughout the episode, we do things to kind of entertain ourselves or to make it more interesting for us, the company. But so much of the time, it's about being easy to recall, easily recognized over a long period of time. So the next questions are not from specific users, but more an amalgamation of different questions. That will be the case for the rest of the episode. But I tried to find the common themes that keep coming up. So I'll go ahead and read them and then answer them now. So one being, I'm a small business founder and I don't really want to become an influencer. Should I be the face of my brand or should I keep the business faceless so it feels bigger and less dependent on me? The annoying answer is depends on the category, depends on your stage of growth. I will say that a personal brand can be good training wheels for a company brand in B2B and in professional services and spaces where they are hiring a human effectively. Like if it's a lawyer or if it's an accountant, the personal brand can be great training wheels for a company brand, especially if that person has an existing network, an existing reputation. You're cashing in on the equity that they already have while you build the business and transfer to focusing on the company brand over time. On the point about feeling bigger, I do get the impulse, but it's also worth noting that you do need to use what you have at different stages of your growth journey. So if you plan well, what you do today doesn't need to be forever. You may use your personal brand for a period of time, knowing damn well that you're going to, over time, build the company brand when you have more money and you have more resources to put into actually building the company brand. Because if you're new and you go straight to building the company brand and your personal brand already has existing equity, you already have an existing network, you're not leveraging what you already have to then cash that in effectively and then build the company brand over time. So what you're doing now doesn't need to be what you're doing in a year or 2 years' time. But the brand does need to have some way to pull people in. I don't know if this is a professional service business. I don't know what type of business it is. If you don't want to be the face of it, that's worth considering as well, knowing damn well it's not going to be a sustainable play, because over time you'll just resent that more and more and not do it. All right, next question. So I want my brand to feel premium, but I'm also using the cheapest tools possible. Can a brand still feel expensive if the logo came from AI, the website came from a template, and the photos are me near a plant? So I do see words to this effect a lot. It's not just on Reddit. I've seen this many times throughout my career. People want to be a premium brand, but they want to pay bottom dollar. Now, that doesn't mean you don't be smart with your money, but if you think about how you'd feel if you were buying a Lamborghini and you got in it, or you were considering buying a Lamborghini and you got in it and the sound system was clearly cheap, that's going to affect your overall perception of the product. Your brand's going to be judged on everything to various degrees if a customer comes into, or a prospect comes into contact with it. When you're building a brand, I think it is important to think about what you are, not just what you say. In these situations, my advice is generally to reduce the scope of what you're doing. So if this is a website, for example, maybe make it a much smaller website, but a high quality website that's reflective of your brand. So instead of making a 20, 40, 50 page website, whatever, maybe it's a 2-3 page website done really well, that when people come into contact with it, it does actually reflect a premium brand. If you can do it for bottom dollar and get away with it, and it does actually look premium, fine, do that. I've rarely seen that work, and it probably only works if you've got the skill set to compensate for that. So if you're a designer, perhaps you can use the cheapest tools and still make it work. If you're not a designer and you're trying to do designs and you want them to look premium using the cheapest tools, probably not going to happen. Your brand is what you are, not what you say. Don't try and put one over your customers. Price accordingly and reflect that position accordingly. Next question. So there's 2 related questions here that I'll just throw together. My business has changed a lot, but I don't know if I need a rebrand or if I'm just bored of looking at my own colors. How do I know whether the brand is actually wrong or if I've just stared at it too long? The related question is, our audience knows our old brand, but the business has outgrown it. How do we rebrand without making loyal customers think we've been acquired, gone corporate, or turned into a completely different company? So it is very common to get bored of your own visual identity. It happens to a lot of people. So expect that. That would be the first thing I'd say is you'll get bored of it, or it'll become uninteresting to you a long time before it'll become uninteresting to the market. You're probably working in at 40, 50 hours a week, whatever it is you're doing. The market might be thinking about your brand 20 seconds a week. It's a huge difference. I'll note the difference between a rebrand and a refresh here, which I did speak about a couple of episodes ago. But basically, a rebrand is what I define as a name change, whereas a refresh, you're keeping a lot of things the same, but you're just evolving them slightly. So there's still recognition from what you had in the updated brand assets, but they've just been refreshed a bit. The commercial argument is always that you have built memory and equity in the existing brand assets, and it depends how much equity you have built. But there is also a personal consideration that I have seen a lot where someone feels like the brand is completely unrepresentative of them, and there is an argument that it should be refreshed if that's weighing you down or weighing the team down. So looking at it through that lens, then thinking about a brand refresh, what impact is this going to have on myself and my team? Like if we are proud of this and we are going to push this a lot harder and we see a benefit to that, sure, it's worth at least factoring into the discussion. But the fact that you've mentioned that you're thinking about changing the colors means that you may be thinking about changing things on a larger scale than what I'd typically recommend. So perhaps just a slight change of colors will give you that feeling of this is more representative of us and this is something I like and I can get behind. If you're thinking about changing massively. If you're thinking about going from like white to black and red to green, then you are going to be wiping the equity that you have in the color assets that you've created. So that's just something to keep in mind. Those are considerations. When you talk about making loyal customers think, like you don't want them to think that you've been acquired or you've gone corporate or you've turned into a completely different company, the first thing there is you can communicate with them. So you can give them notice ahead of time. This is what's going to be happening. I've done that with clients before where you do start the process of getting customers ready for a rebrand or a refresh before it happens. It's a good idea to do that generally if you have some sort of equity built up, just so that they know what's coming and they're not just shocked one day by it. It depends on how many customers you have. If you are a business that has not that many customers, but they're high paying customers, like in more of a B2B or enterprise space or that type of thing, it is very doable to contact them one-on-one about all of that. But I would also just question how you came to the conclusion that the business has outgrown the current brand. Like that's a very vague thing to say. That's a thing that I hear a lot. The problem is that I often see that come back to the fact that the internal team is just sick of it. And their way to say we're sick of it is we've outgrown it. And 9 times out of 10, there's nothing wrong with it. All right, next question. We've grown from 1 core offer into 5 services, 3 product names, and a couple of internal labels that the sales team invented. Customers keep asking, so what do you actually do? Do we need a rebrand, a naming system, or do we just need everyone to stop making up new names? Well, definitely stop making up new names. You want to be consistent with the names you use for your products and your services. You may simply be at the stage where a naming system or a naming convention would be all you need. So that would be useful, I'd say, in most of these situations. You could take this as a chance to evaluate your service and product portfolio as a whole, because if you have services or products in there that are just not really helping or they're not really profitable and you don't think they ever will be, or there's no reason really to keep them, it might be a good idea to consider getting rid of them. The internal labels, if they're helpful to the sales team and they're not being used externally, that probably doesn't matter too much. But what you present externally, you want to be consistent. If customers are asking you what you actually do, that is a bit weird. I'm going to assume you actually meant people in the market or prospects were asking you what you do. If the customers are asking what you do and they're paying you, that's another issue entirely. But what is sometimes useful here is having somewhere in a prominent space the boring statement of what you actually do. And that can sometimes be more effective. It doesn't mean you need to only say that. You don't need to just say you're an accountant, for example. But if you're using a lot of emotive language, if you're talking around the fact you're an accountant and you are an accountant, it might be useful stating that up front. And then you can keep your emotive language around that. So definitely consider putting the boring descriptive statement of what you do in the mix. And I'm not saying the only thing you talk about, but put that in the mix to make that more easy for people to understand. If they can't understand what you do, they're unlikely to buy from you. All right, next questions. So these are another couple of related questions. So different teams describe us differently. Marketing says one thing, sales says another. Leadership says something vaguer, and customer success explains it best, but nobody listens to them. Poor old customer success. Is our brand unclear, or are we just internally allergic to alignment? A related question there is leadership wants the brand to feel premium, sales wants it to feel approachable, product wants it to feel technical, and marketing wants it to feel human. Is this a positioning exercise or a hostage negotiation? Not quite a hostage negotiation, although I hope not anyway. But I guess the first thing that comes to mind here is that it's unlikely that your brand will be just one thing. It will be a cocktail of things. It will have a few key ingredients generally rather than just one thing. So it's not necessarily just premium or just approachable or just technical. It might be a mixture. Or it should be a mixture, because if it is just one thing, it's unlikely you're going to be that distinctive. So that's the first thing I'd say, is that it shouldn't be just one thing. Now, in these situations, the company, as it's being described in the question, is probably allergic to alignment. There's a lot like it. It's rare that, alignment's perfect. I don't think I've ever seen it. And it's probably not a surprise that customer success explains it the best. They're the ones who are closest to the customer. They're not necessarily the ones that are valued the most, though. So I get it. Part of the issue here is the political part of the job. And I'm assuming this is coming from a brand manager or a marketing manager, this question. So internal discussions, people thinking they know better, it's tough. One thing that could be useful, again, and I know I say it a lot, is that if you ask how the customers describe you, and you could do that yourself potentially, record the Zoom calls, show that to the rest of the team to have evidence about why you think you should be doing the things that you're doing or doing the things that you're suggesting. Another option is to have a consultant come in and help break the deadlock. Sometimes having a third party say it or break that deadlock is necessary, unfortunately. No, I don't make the rules, but I acknowledge that sometimes is what is necessary to move things forward. A step in the right direction could be just a few short snippets from customers who describe how they perceive the brand. In my latest episode, I'll mention him again, but Ryan Gibson, he talked about how Amazon uses qualitative customer data to break the tie when things like this happen. So different teams are disagreeing on something. The customer has the last say. So they'll get qualitative data from the customer. Whichever way that leans, that's the decision they'll go with. All right, next question. We keep launching new offers because sales needs something fresh to talk about. Now, the market doesn't know what we're known for. Do we have a growth strategy or have we accidentally built a brand zoo? Haven't heard of a brand zoo before, but I think it's a good term to describe what can happen at times when a brand just becomes a whole mismatch of different things that are completely misaligned. First red flag here is sales wanting something fresh to talk about. So that's not a good reason to keep offering new things to make sales job easier. They'd be better off working out what different ways to get your existing offers in front of the right people. So again, and this might not be something that you can do much about, brand manager or marketing manager, but we don't want to focus on entertaining ourselves. That's not going to be what's most effective. Brands need to stick to something for a lot longer than they think they do, or they'd like to. Yep, it's boring, but I mean, it's work. This is what's effective. Sales and internal teams think about the company a lot. So they get that bias that something is stale, but the market probably doesn't think about your brand at all. I know I've already mentioned that, but I'm going to say it again because repetition is important. So what I'd say instead is if you have products or services that are selling well and are profitable, instead of needing new offers to give sales something to talk about, I'd look at different ways to promote what you already have. But that's a stakeholder management problem with sales wanting something fresh to talk about, more so than a brand effectiveness problem. All right, next question. We acquired another company, but their brand has more love in one niche than ours does. Do we absorb it, endorse it, keep it alive, or pretend this is all phase 2 while nobody knows what's happening? This is very much a brand architecture question and perhaps a targeting question as well. You'd hope these questions were asked prior to acquiring another company, and this was part of the diligence, and there was a plan for what brands were going to be used and in which way. The question states that it has more love in one niche. So there is the consideration that you effectively keep that brand for that niche. That is a possibility. And you keep your existing brand for other niches, let's say. That is a consideration. There's a lot of detail that needs to be worked out to go into there. It is worth noting that you are going to be effectively splitting resources. So if you're putting resources into the acquired brand as well as the existing brand, over time, that might not be the most effective approach because you're diluting the resources you're using to build these brands. It certainly needs some numbers around what you expect the costs to be to keep running the two brands side by side. Can you keep running both brands long term? It's not usually advised. It's just a distraction in the end. More often than not, brands have to be killed than not. So you have to have a really good reason to dilute resources and put them across two brands. Part of that reason is the existing equity. You don't necessarily want to just flush that, but you could also look at making a transition over a long period of time from one brand to the next. It doesn't have to be something that you do today or overnight, but perhaps part of the plan could be over the next 2 years, we're going to move all the customers or not put resources into acquiring customers through an existing brand and instead put all the resources into one brand and just leave the other one as it is. Just keep it on life support while it's still giving us customers and that type of thing. Over time, inform those customers that you're going to move to the new brand. Now, it also depends on your category and what type of business it is, but that's a few thoughts that I have on that. So, next question. 2 to go. This one is, our brand sounds different on the website, in proposals, in onboarding emails, on LinkedIn, and in the CEO's keynote slides. Is tone of voice supposed to be flexible, or have we accidentally become 5 companies in a trench coat? You've probably become 5 companies in a trench coat. So part of the value of being a brand is to be identified. Having a brand that's not identifiable, not recognizable is not useful. So I'll start there. It shouldn't really sound different or look different or feel different necessarily. There might be an argument that there are nuances on different platforms for a brand, but the point of it is to be recognized and identified. And if it's not, you're not actually using the equity from your brand, or you're not building equity in the brand. If there's 5 different ways that it's presented that don't clearly make it look like it's the same thing or coming from the same place, you are effectively building 5 brands at once. And that's not smart. So tone of voice being flexible, err on the side of not being flexible. Err on the side of keeping everything uniform as much as possible. I've come across this before as well, that people are saying, oh, we don't want to box ourselves in too much, or we don't want our brand to be too controlled. And they were talking about the brand guidelines, I remember a couple of times, and they're guidelines. The point of them is to have boundaries. For something to have meaning and for it to be recognized, it needs to have boundaries of what it is and what it isn't. A tree is not a helicopter. All right, last question. So we're about to update the logo, but someone asked whether we have actually fixed the positioning first. Can we please ignore that person, or are they annoyingly right? I'd wager it's more about understanding your positioning than fixing your position. So maybe you do need to understand and commit to a position. Remember, you want to keep assets for a long period of time. So your logo is not something you do want to be changing every 2 to 3 years, and particularly not wholesale changes. Every time you make a wholesale change, a massive change, you get rid of the equity you've built. This constant referral back to positioning, and this is what I noticed when I was doing research for this episode all across the internet, is positioning, positioning, positioning. And so many people have a different description or idea of what it is. Sometimes it's messaging. Sometimes it is strategic, which is what I believe it to be. Positioning being, what are you positioning yourself against? Or what are you positioning yourself for? Now, your positioning, let's use that as you're trying to be more, let's say more premium is one of the things you're trying to do. And your logo looks like it was made in clip art. Yes, you might want to refresh that asset. But what I'd say is, do you have a brand strategy? And if you don't, it's probably time to get one. If you do, is your current logo in violation of that strategy? I'd say that's a better way of describing this, rather than saying, have we fixed our positioning? It's probably less so fixing a position and more so understanding your position. This idea that we choose our position is a bit of a misnomer, because we are positioned a certain way to certain people and perceived a certain way. We don't necessarily get to choose that. We influence it, but we don't get to choose it. And a lot of what the perception is of our position against other brands is going to be what we are, and not necessarily what our visual identity is. It'll be based on a whole range of factors. So get someone in like me, a brand strategist, to do a brand strategy. Make sure that your logo is then reflective of that strategy. Otherwise, you can consider a refresh. But this idea of just updating the logo for the sake of it, especially if you have some existing equity in it, yeah, I would be against that idea in general. Thank you for tuning in and listening to this episode. I appreciate it. I'll be back in your ears soon. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Push Podcast. Please remember to subscribe, and if you are enjoying the episodes, please leave a review of the podcast on your platform of choice. It really helps to build the podcast credibility and to help others find this type of information.